Oh, hello.
Hello. We'll just give you all a moment to kind of hop in the Zoom. Hi, nice to see you all. It's lovely to see so many friendly faces. My name is Sonia, and this is Donna.
I'm Donna. Hi. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Donna's one of our newest employees.
I am. Yes. Been here 5 months, I think.
Oh, God.
5 months. If you have mini skeins, I'm normally making them on Piclet. Or if you have tops to spin, I pick a lot of tops as well. It's my main things that I do.
And then, of course, we've also got the wonderful Emily Williams with us today as well. And I know Emily is definitely one of my favorite designers. I think you have a real way of like combining different colors or shapes. I feel like every pattern you design, there's always like something a little bit unexpected or some kind of interesting technique where I'm like, oh, I've never seen anyone do that before. And like, it hadn't occurred to me to do that. Particularly, I think my favorite pattern of yours, other than the amazing ones you've done for John Arbon Textiles, of course, is the shawl you've got with all those like eyelets. And it's like a long... You did it
like the little presenty ones.
Yeah, it's
like in the
beautiful.
It's really
yeah. Like you've always just got some kind of interesting construction you're playing with. But anyway, I'll stop waffling. So yeah, we just thought it would be nice to kind of have a chat with you. And yeah, just also it seems like there's lots of fab people here, which is amazing. And no doubt they might have some questions for you as well, just about kind of what inspires you or, you know, anything else.
Yeah, well, that's great. I'm happy to answer questions. I can obviously waffle at questions for a really long time. But yeah, no, that thing where you were saying, like, you know, you've always got something new. It's basically I have a very, very short attention span. Like, so I have like loads of admiration for designers who can kind of, you know, get a thing, and it's like, I'm going to do this one thing and I'm going to explore all these different attitudes of it, and I'm like, oh, I'll do that, and I'll do it about 2 patterns, and then I'll go, right, squirrel, there's a new shiny thing over here. It's like, what happens if I do this? But yeah, lots of my most interesting, like, they usually start with somebody like asking me a question or something like that, and it's like, or what would happen if I tried doing this? And then as soon as I've got like a big what if question, I can sit down and figure out how to make it work. So it's like Canisp, the one that's behind you that I'm wearing, that was like, what would happen if you made a raglan all in one piece, as in without any shaping, and it was just flat? Like, what shape would you end up with if you split it open and opened it all up into a flat piece of fabric? Like, where would it all end up being? And it turns out it ends up being like this.
Yeah, cool.
And can you just do a little spin, because I think on Canisp it's the like that shoulder seam. Oh yeah, see, definitely. Look at that, the
stripes really accentuate it, don't they? It's amazing.
Yeah, well, there you go. I'll go all the way around.
Oh. Give us a twirl.
This is where I wish I had a spinny chair. But yeah, so that was so the front and the sleeves are all knit in one flat piece and then sewn onto the back. So.
And that really accentuates, you get that real bias fabric going on, so it really accentuates that like flowy nature of the Devonia anyway. It's a perfect like marriage of like yarn and pattern, I think.
Oh, the thing I really like about it, it's one of those jumpers that it's like the jumper that you wear that identifies people as a knitter, because like non-knitters just look at it and don't even realise, but everybody who is a knitter, like, they look at you a bit funny and then they look at you really weird and then they start going, can you just turn around? So it's like, what happened there?
where are your sleeve seams? Like,
yeah, and you get you spend lots of time standing around while people sort of look at it and try and figure it out. So that's always quite fun. But that's what I always meant to do, a cardigan version, but I never got around to it. Maybe I will one day.
One day, yeah, like a V-neck cardi. That could be great.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking you'd start it in a different place then.
Yeah.
It would all go in a different direction, but I've never done it, so maybe one day. I think I'm actually still recovering from the maths involved in this one. And then every so often somebody goes, could you modify this? And I'm like, nope. No, it's the only jumper that I'll answer with a definite, well, if you have a really big head for maths, you can try modifying it, but I'm not.
No.
Do you have any, because I think that's definitely one of the hardest bits of designing, is like then figuring out the grading. So how is that, like a love-hate relationship for you, or how have you kind of come to terms with making
so grading is a definite love. I think it's great. It's like there's so many decisions that you have to make, and as you practice you get better at making them before you actually start, instead of like, you know, in the first 3 or 4 jumpers I tried to grade, it's like I did this really nice one, had like leaves around a yoke, and then I tried grading it, and I was just like, because I'd knit one size for me and it's fine, I was like, right, I'm just making it into a pattern, and then I was like, oh no, it really doesn't work when you do that after you've knit one sample, because there's always something in it. You get to the point that somebody, I really wish I had not chosen a motif with 13 stitches in it. Like 13 is such a stupid, it's just the worst number to try and do sums with, because like nothing divides by it. Like it's not a round number. You know, you try doing the decreases up into the yoke and it's like 13 is just really silly. I think 12 is much better. Like,
was that amazing colour work jumper that you did?
Yeah, it was like a green.
You've never done a pattern for it, have you?
No.
I loved that. Love it. It is so amazing.
Like, yeah, and then it's like, by the time I graded it, and by the time it didn't work out and graded it, I just hated it so much that there was no way I was knitting another one, like slightly different, to see if it worked. But I think when you start designing, it's quite, you just have to accept that there's probably going to be, I don't know, I've got this, like, I've still got 5 or 6 design folders of shame on my computer that are just like these like half finished patterns that I haven't looked at for like 3 years, and I probably got like 3/4 of a sample for some of them and no knitting for other ones, and I keep just thinking, it's a bit like when you have projects that you just leave in a bag for ages. At some point I'm just gonna like, I'm not even gonna open them, and I'm just gonna go like delete and make them all go away, and then I might feel a bit better.
I think that's definitely true, isn't it? It's like actually the hardest thing about designing is figuring out how to like make something that looks unique, but actually like writing instructions for is doable. It's like, it's not the knitting, it's like the clear followable.
Yeah, and it's like, and people keep going, oh, do you prefer bottom up or top down? And I'm like, well, it totally depends which way it's easiest to write the instructions for the jumper.
Yeah.
Like, you know, at what point are you really interested in all the patterns matching down the different bits of it? You know, so if it's actually quite simple to make everything line up at the top of the sleeves and the top of the body, then doing it bottom up works really, really well. But actually sometimes getting to that point and figuring out which row you have to be on to join everything right on those 2 places means that it's like, oh, actually if I just start this top down, it will all just work out and you can knit it until you get to the end and that will be fine. So yeah.
Grand.
But like, yeah, I'm just a bit of a magpie. It's like, ooh, shiny new thing. New idea. Let's see what happens there.
We've already got someone in the chat. Nancy has said that a cardigan version of Canisp would be awesome. I agree as well.
Definitely.
So there's already the 3 of us there. Show us your samples. What have you been?
Okay, well, so started machine knitting, and my intention for my next few patterns is to do both a hand knit and a machine knit version of the same pattern. So this is like one of the first ones, which is like a lace swirly hat. So this like hat top, I've done quite a lot of hand knitting before, but actually it's a really good construction for the machine, because shaping on a knitting machine is a bit of a, well, it's still faster than hand knitting, but knitting a straight rectangle is even faster. So with a bit of knitting and seaming, you can make a rectangle into a hat like that. So made the machine knit version, and then you can't really see this because it's quite dark, but I've got a really nice, this is Ripples Crafts yarn. So I'm going to make it like a blue, this is the hand knit one. So I've just got to knit the rest of that. And then that will be a pattern. In my slightly, well, my actually finished pile, so that the next pattern I want to release.
Oh.
So this is like, I made this last year for like, it's my COVID jumper, like, because, well, I don't know about everybody else, but you know, so we had restrictions up here for so long. So basically for the whole of the winter, you could only really see people outside. And it's like, it's really cold. I don't get that cold if I'm doing something outside, but I get freezing if I'm sat still. So I was like, this was it's really massive. Like, it's just, you can put it over the top of any item of clothing that you're wearing. And it's like, you know, it's the thicker Lopi yarn. And it's like, it's all over colour work. So it is literally the warmest thing I have ever owned. But I made the pattern and I was like, wow, this is really amazing. And then Lopi was worldwide out of stock. So I was like, so I didn't ever quite get around to releasing it last year, but I'm hoping Lopi will make a bit of a comeback. And if not, I've found another yarn to substitute, and I'll have to make so I might make another version of that, because it actually only took me 3 days to knit it, because it's like,
because it's that thick.
It's really, yeah, it's really thick. So it's on like 7mm needles, I think. It goes really, really fast. So, and it's the pattern's really simple as well. It's just, it's a 4-stitch repeat. So, you know, like the colorwork, you can just memorize it really, really easily. So that's quite fun. And then this is my just finished. So I took photos of this a couple of days ago. Show you the right side. That's the right side. So this is a shawl in Black Isle yarn. So this is a sneaky peek. This is going in. Julie has put together a Christmas kit, and the pattern for this is going to go in her Christmas kit with the yarn. So yeah, so I've got that to put out. So this was
it's knitted, I'm guessing, not crochet.
Yeah, no, it's knit. That way around. So it's actually a really not very complicated lace pattern with like double yarn overs in it.
Yeah.
So I was trying to make, I was trying to make one skein and 2 little mini skeins into like a really quite big shawl. So it needed to be really lacy and open. There you go. Shout out to my friends. Julie's Killen sock based, which is really lovely. It's like quite it's quite high spin and like really lovely stitch definition. And I think it's going to be really hard wearing as well. So I'm kind of quite excited about that. I know these will be something.
Oh yes, lovely.
Like desk yarn. What else have I got? Oh, no, in the swatch zone.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Ooh. That one, that's a bit of secret swatch. That would probably be a while. So I think that's going into a collection for blacker yarns, but I'm not sure what the release date for that is. So a lot of the designing I've done recently is for books or collections or stuff like that. So there's loads of things that aren't published. I don't have samples for because I've sent them to somebody else. So yeah, that's why I haven't really released anything for myself. I overcommitted to other people's publishing ideas because it all sounded quite fun. And then I was like, I actually haven't got any time to do self-published patterns. So, and then
how do you find that balance? If you could talk about that a little bit.
Well,
I
don't think I'm doing it very well.
No.
So basically what happened was it was all going actually okay, and then there was a lockdown and I had to homeschool twice.
No.
So I've had I basically got nothing done for a year, other than I had committed to, I like to sort of maybe do 2 or 3 things for other people a year, and then like 3 or 4 patterns for myself, and that's been enough. But literally last year I did those 3 patterns, and it seems like people are coming out. Everybody's obviously sort of spent a long time thinking like, right, okay, maybe it's time we start doing things again. So I've actually just had loads of really like fun, like really interesting sounding offers. So yeah, that's how I've got unbalanced for that. But so basically I've decided that I'm not saying yes to anything else until my desk is clear of commitments, which hopefully should be about February. Because I've got like 3 or 4 piles of yarn that I want to play with. I want to make another colourwork jumper. I need to knit myself another Arrina because my other one's getting so worn that I quite like to make another one. So that's it. So I've got to knit a cardigan and a shawl and another shawl.
That's not that one.
Yeah, that's the border mill of alpaca rose.
It's beautiful.
Swatching. I hadn't realised when the yarn was suggested to me exactly how many colours of it there were. Cool. So like this is the turquoise and like neutral beachy inspiration samples. So swatch, play with some colours. This is for a secret new magazine. Ooh. But it's not my project, so I probably shouldn't say anything more. But secret new Scottish magazine, which I'm going to be doing some editing for as well. So that would be very nice. So yeah, so that's what I'm watching. Fortunately, I don't have another job at the moment, so I can't actually fit that in. I'm still this is my comfort knitting. It's like the Blackfold Hat.
Oh yes.
Nice.
Put in a plug that comes free if you sign on to my newsletter, and it's the only pattern I've ever designed that both my husband and my son have requested multiple versions of. So it's really good for just using up a single skein of stash yarn in like a heavier 4-ply. The skinny it needs to be sort of heavier end of 4-ply or sport weight. Right. But it's like super versatile, fits everybody from one size because it's just stretchy rib. Yeah. So I've just finished that one. That's my comfort knitting. Just round and round and round doing the same stitch. Don't even have to count the rounds. Carry on until it's long enough and then make a crown. So there's only 3 rounds where you have to concentrate to do shaping. And the rest of it's really simple. So
that seems good.
Yeah, and anyone will wear a beanie, won't they?
Definitely.
Beanies are having a real that's the best thing to give a non-knitter, I have found, is just like beanie hats.
Yes,
yeah, but like it's got to be a really plain beanie hat.
Yeah, exactly.
The next one. Can I have a black one, Mum?
Oh, good luck. Fun.
I probably will, because it is simple enough that I could probably bear to make it. I don't normally knit anything out of black yarn because it's so hard to take photos of it.
Who does all your photos, Emily?
Depends. Julie, Black Eye Yarns.
Right.
Julie does a lot of them for me, so which is wonderful because it means I don't have to control my husband and
they are always beautiful as well, like the ones for Canisp where you're sort of standing next to this lake, or
that's Loch Ness
for this Blackfold Hat where you're
look, I've got my version.
Oh.
And these you're in a field of blossoms, so that was when you when the yarn was kind of called Appledore and all named after apple varieties, and my friends have just a little 1 acre orchard with a collection of heritage apple trees, so I was like, right, okay. I can take samples there. And then it wasn't actually until I turned up to do the photos that I was like, Sonia's matched the colours to apple trees really well. It's like, maybe she even planned it. I was like, I can't believe it took me until I got into an orchard to go, look, maybe she's actually taken this theme quite seriously. Hadn't crossed my mind at all. I was like, got there, I was like, look, that's exactly the colour of all the branches. Look at the blue ones. I think there's not much blue going on with an apple.
No, but like the yellowy green colour and the grey for the bark. So actually, when you put this into like a new leaf,
it's like the red and the brown. I think the brown in particular was quite an apple barky brown.
Yeah, definitely. And there's always bits of like, white from the blossom and stuff like that. So I was like, oh yeah.
How would you say, in terms of designing, how would you say that like your process works? Do you have an idea and then do a swatch, or is it like you'll start with yarn and then do some swatching and then it tells
it depends. I always like to have some parameters when I start off. So if someone just goes, say you get approached from them, would you like to do a design in our yarn? And you're like, well, what would you like? Well, just choose. And I'm like, well, I can't just choose. That's ridiculous. There's too many choices. So you have to either tell me that, this yarn or that yarn, or like, because, you get the yarn and you're like, that would be really good for this. And then it might take you off in one direction. So it either starts as I have some yarn and I want to figure out what to do to make the most of it, or it's like, or have this idea and I need to find the right yarn to do. Like, so with this jumper was, I have this idea and I know that I want it to be 4-ply, and I want it to be yarn with the right kind of drape, and I wanted really high contrast stripes so that you could see all the shaping. So that was, I have an idea and I'm going looking for the yarn. But there's always a lot of swatching. So the way I work, I do quite a few quite small swatches that I don't keep. Like, so this big, sort of, 2-inch square type ones. And just to try combinations of colours and like the size of needles. And, I literally knit them. I don't necessarily even block them. But then once I think I've decided which, so I would never just try one needle size. I would always try 3 and then pick the one that I thought was the best.
So you start by just like acquainting yourself with the yarn.
Yeah. And then and then once I've got one of those that, one or two of those that I'm trying to decide, because quite often you start off and you knit this much and you just go, no, it's not happening, and you just rip it out and start again. Once I've kind of got that combination of stitch pattern and needle size with the yarn, then I'll do a bigger gauge swatch. And like so I make my gauge swatches this size. So that's probably 8 by 10, something like that, sort of just a little bit smaller than A4. So that's how big I like to make my final swatch for something, because that gives you then an accurate enough idea of how much yarn you'll need for the jumpers, or whatever it is you're making as well. So so you don't end up asking for far too much. And then if I'm doing something where there's like some, and then I'll write the pattern. So do the grading and write the pattern before I knit anything. Well, no, not before I knit anything. I do the grading and write the pattern before I knit anything complicated. So I'm quite often, if I'm making a jumper, will knit the whole body. Or so, if you've got sort of straight plain section, I'll crack on with knitting that while I'm grading it, but I won't do, I like to have the pattern written so that almost like I can test it. And then
that makes sense. So you're kind of your first guinea pig then, often.
Yeah.
Depending on whether something works, will you then go back and tweak the pattern, and then it's kind of a dance between those two?
Yeah, I don't change patterns that much. Well, there's sort of sometimes things where I think, I didn't explain that very well, and so I'll go in and figure the wording, and then sometimes you just, I think I've done enough garments now that I tend to have a much clearer idea of what I want them to actually be before I start, so I don't really end up usually having to make any changes. But I've probably cursed myself for my next jumper now.
I think that's so interesting what you were saying about like having some kind of parameters to start with. I think with so many creative things, that's something you hear again and again, whatever form of creativity it is, that actually having like a completely blank slate.
Oh, it's just completely
really
paralyzing.
Like having some kind of like external input.
So like, I mean, a lot of my garments have been like specific things that I've wanted. So there's a lot of stuff written about, how you should identify your ideal customer and and I'm just like, no, these are my ideal customers. Somebody likes the same colours as me. They like blue and yellow. That's all good. But like, so for example, like Arrina, which is my sort of Shetland yarn, Shetland pattern thing, the idea from that came from one Shetland Wool Week when I was trying on all the jumpers in like the Jamesons and the Jameson and Smith shops, and they're unisex, and so obviously they didn't fit me at all, like even vaguely. Like they just, like, there's some pictures of it somewhere that are just hilarious, like just really tight around my hips, and then there's just like, somehow there's so much extra fabric, like these wings sort of coming off here, these huge folds of like extra stuff, and it just looked, I was like, the shape is just so wrong for me. So yeah, Arrina was, I want an all over Fair Isle in all of those amazing colours and patterns, but I don't want it to be that traditional shape, because
that like 80s like kind of like,
they're all slightly narrower at the hips than they are at the bust, which is a disaster. And then by the time you get up to the larger sizes, there's the built-in assumption for men that if you're large, you're also tall with long arms. So, and I'm really not either of those things. I have short arms and I'm not very tall. So so they just don't fit me. So that was I want to say slim sleeves, because they have enormous sleeves and I don't like enormous sleeves. So that's how that one started out. And then I knew that I wanted to make it in all of the Shetland colours, because there's just so many to choose from.
So is that something that got you into designing then? Just finding that a lot of hand knitting designs didn't work for your particular body shape? Could you talk more about?
Well, I mean, when I started knitting, none of the designs even came in my size.
Yeah.
You know, so, I mean, I restarted knitting sort of a couple of years after I graduated, so probably like early 2000s. And, that was like the Rowan magazine heyday. And the designs, the photography is so kind of alluring, but I didn't know any better. So, there's often always some surprise detail in the pattern that you're not. I can remember knitting this whole jumper and then like realizing it had a Peter Pan collar that you couldn't see in the photographs. I was following the instructions for the neck, going like, I don't even understand what's happening. And then it came out with this little Peter Pan. I was like, what? I don't like that. And then I took the photos and the woman was wearing an enormous, like, the typical really long-haired wafy Rowan model with like hair everywhere and this massive scarf on. And it was like, well, no wonder I didn't realise there was a Peter Pan collar on it. And then, so I used to make stuff and it used to be slightly too small. So I'd sort of like make the ones that were a bit baggier and then they would sort of go on. So and then once I'd knit a few, I started thinking, so I knit a few and then like Ravelry started. And I can remember the thing that kicked me into designing, so it was a calf facet cardigan and it was stripy and it was made of cotton, which I haven't used since because I am quite traumatized by this jumper. And it was raglan. And so it had like a thick stripe and then it had 3 single row stripes and then it had another thick band. And it was this amazing color sequence. The colors were just fantastic. And it was raglan and it was knit flat in pieces. And I swear I have never woven so many ends, unnecessary ends, into a jumper in my life. It's like, even the front and the back and the 2 fronts and the back were not joined, so every single row stripe that you then have to seam it really accurately to match them. You have to seam all the raglans to match them. And, that was at the point that I discovered Ravelry and realized circular knitting for raglans was a thing. And by the time, I just remember thinking like, this jumper is so amazing, but the techniques that they are asking me to use are so wrong. And it just made it such a palaver, like the end. And because it was like that cotton glacé, it's like actually weaving the ends made all the seams like really bulk and dent, like sort of massive and fat and quite hard. I was like,
yeah, if anything, you should just like knot them together and they'd be less bulky, probably on the
or just knit it in one piece.
Obviously. So is that something you really think of then in your design?
Yeah, absolutely.
So knitting it and you're trying to make something that they will be
it works, because there is, like I say, there's no. I admire people who can go, I'm going to use this construction and I'm going to explain. And I'm like, I'm not scared of seaming. I knit a lot of things seamless because it makes sense. But, Canisp has got feature seams down it. And I quite like the feature seams. And they're not seams for the faint-hearted either. Because you're seaming 2 different bias edges together. And I'm quite happy to do that if there's a point to them. But then if it's easier to knit it and easier to make it in the round, then I will make it in the round. It's like if it's top down it works best, then I'll do that. And if it's bottom up that works best, then I'll do that. So yeah, it just depends for, this, but you always have this thing where you have an idea of what you want to knit and you have to just decide which way is going to be easiest to knit it and also easiest to explain it in instructions, because those 2 are also not necessarily the same, largely like matching patterns and where you start in motifs and all of that kind of thing. But yeah,
You don't want to be the person who...
I don't want to be the person who goes...
So that they can never knit with cotton again.
Yeah, you're not going to be Catherine Bassett.
No. I still actually, I gave the cardigan away, and I would, it was too small anyway, because of course it was. It was also cropped, which I hadn't really quite figured out before I knit it. But yeah, the colours were, I mean, that's always the thing that attracts you, isn't it? It's like all the colours and the yarn, just the colours, so wonderful. And the way he combines them all is so amazing. But then it's like, yeah, I'm not sure you're actually interested in the technical process of the knitting. I can see that you're super interested in the aesthetic of what you get at the end. But yeah, that was the last Rowan pattern I ever made. And then I went through a phase of just making things up for myself. And then I thought, right, I should actually try and write one. So I did, and I've been doing it ever since.
How long ago was that your first pattern, do you reckon?
It's probably
far back.
The first published one would have been, I guess, just over 10 years ago, 10 or 11 years, something like that.
Just had a little look in the chat as well, and we've got Nancy has asked, do you knit a flat swatch if the design is in the round, or do you knit a swatch in the round, or does it depend?
I steep my swatches in the round. That one there. It's steeped. So yeah, I knit my swatches. I learned to knit continental, and because when I knit flat, I actually had you could kind of, if that depends on the yarn, but if you use like a cotton yarn or something that's going to really show it up, I think I had a slightly different tension in my knits and my purl rows. So and for me, that's much more consistent. So my tension is pretty consistent in stocking stitch between knitting flat and knitting in the round, because I have solved that issue of my knits and my purls being slightly different. So yeah, while I don't hold much truck with the idea that one knitting style is better than another, it's kind of whatever works for you is fine. But because I'm doing it as a professional thing, you want it to be consistent. And also the way I learned to knit, was really inefficient with like holding yarn and picking it up. And there was like an awful lot of quite big movement going on. And I tried quite a lot of things to practice making that movement more efficient and the tension more similar between the two. But in the end, it was easier just to swap techniques and actually try learning it efficiently, somehow completely new, than sort of modifying what I was already doing. But yes, no, I do try and swatch in the round if I'm knitting in the round. Although sometimes if it's just stocking stitch, I'm too lazy.
Thank you for talking to us. I think on that note, we've come to the end of the time, and we're going to have to kind of love you and leave you. But it's been such a blast. You've definitely it's a really nice way to kick off a Friday and the weekend, having a chat to an old friend. So
yeah, lovely to see you.
Yes. And thank you for your wisdoms. I think it's been great having some like designing insights, and we'll certainly have to pick your brains again sometime.
Well, it was lovely to chat to you.
Yeah, you too, Emily. Great to see you again.
Yeah. All right. I'll catch you again soon.
Perfect. Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah.
Especially Emily.
Thank you.
Bye.